So hello and welcome, and we're going to be talking about supporting underrepresented learners in an online environment and online courses. I see a few familiar faces, but for those of you who have not met me before, my name is Michelle Williams. I'm the academic specialist at the Gatton College of Pharmacy. So I am not a pharmacist. My degree is in educational psychology, but I am learning a lot about medication just by osmosis working over there. So it's been very interesting. Let's go ahead and get started. And as Kim said, if you have a question or a comment, you can type it into the chat. And I'm also fine if you unmute your mic and interrupt me. That's fine with me too. So what I'd like to talk about today is I'd like to facilitate a discussion regarding the needs of underrepresented learners, both online and face-to-face. I'm hoping that we can chat and I may learn some things from all of you. I'd also like to provide some tips for increasing academic success for underrepresented learners online, particularly students whose first or best language is not English, and to offer suggestions that would foster more interaction and understanding among students from a variety of backgrounds. So just to take a minute to talk about who underrepresented learners may be, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means. So students with a diversity of backgrounds, learning needs, that sort of identify with various groups, first generation students, students with disabilities, low income students, students with children or other dependents, students whose first or best language is not English. Some of the people here today, including myself, may also identify with these groups. Whoops. I apologize for the slide issue. I have one of those magic mouse things, and if I just touch the top of it, all the slides go rushing forward, so I apologize for that. So some challenges in an online learning environment for underrepresented learners, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, and if you have some additional things that you'd like to add in the chat, I would welcome that. Unreliable internet access, a distracting home environment, feelings of isolation, economic uncertainty and financial difficulty, communication barriers, difficulty accessing course materials, and reluctance to ask for help. And my guess would be that we've all experienced some variety of these challenges as well. And I think that students have too. But I believe the difference between those occasional challenges that we experience and the way they may be experienced by students who are underrepresented in educational environment is that they may have more of an impact in the lives of those students. So, and for us at the College of Pharmacy, in my experience, the reluctance to ask for help is a big barrier. It's really difficult to identify the students who may need some additional help. Either they don't think that help is for them, or that it's available, or that they want to ask. So I'm not sure in your areas where you work if you've experienced this, but it's a big challenge for us to even identify these students at times. So I want to talk particularly about ESL or E2 students. And what I mean by that is these are students whose first or best language is not English. At the College of Pharmacy, of course, these students are fluent English speakers. but the designation ESL, from my understanding, is more likely to indicate the teaching of those students. So if any of you know a more appropriate way of indicating that group of students, I would appreciate it. But for the time being, I'm going to use the terms ESL or E2 students. And just on a personal note, this is a topic that's very near to my heart. My mother spoke English as a second language. My grandmother who lived with us did not speak English at all, so I grew up in a bilingual household. And I've been in circumstances where the language being spoken, the first language, was not English. And so, and as I'm sure some of you may have too, but I throughout my career, even though I'm not an expert, I have a really strong interest in helping learners navigate and decode and encode information in other language environments. And so to have the opportunity to put together programming for students whose first and best language is in English is very exciting to me. So, and it's the reason why it's important for me to discuss this topic as well. Another reason is that approximately 10% of our students at the Gatton College of Pharmacy, their first language is not English. And this past year, when we did the metrics on academically at-risk students, they were disproportionately represented. And so that created a sort of institutional mandate for us to do something. So, so when we had that opportunity, I jumped on it. And so we're putting together some additional programming. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute too.
Dr. Williams, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Were the students, or not were, but are the 10% of students who are non-native English speakers, are they primarily international students, or are they U.S. students but who speak primarily another language?
Thank you so much for asking that question. They are not primarily international students. In many cases, and I think this is, I've read some literature that said this is often the case in colleges of pharmacy, that they are students who move to the United States usually in late elementary school or junior high or high school. So they are, fluent English speakers, but they sort of navigate, in a bilingual kind of way. And they're, and I'm going to talk about this in just a minute, but they're fluent, but because their first language is not English, they have some needs that people don't think about in the classroom. So, so that's a great question. We do have international students, but the larger proportion of our students are American citizens whose first language is not English, but they have been through, at least partially been through the U.S. education system, K-12 education, etc. So, yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Sure. So why focus on these students even beyond if they're not disproportionately represented in students who are academically at risk? We need them for one reason. Their ability to speak more than one language gives them access to communities in the U.S. and abroad that may be underserved, especially in healthcare fields. That's incredibly important. If someone has the ability to speak a language and access to a community that maybe is more difficult to gain access to for people whose first language is English. And some of those communities may be underserved in terms of healthcare and other needs as well. And also helping ESL students helps everyone. So, improving instruction for students whose first language is not English improves instruction for everybody through universal design. It increases cultural awareness and cultural humility. I think there are a lot of initiatives, particularly in pharmacy education, but I'm assuming across disciplines, in increasing cultural awareness and humility. And from my experience, there's really no better way than to talk to people who are from other cultures and speak other languages. So creating those connections among students is incredibly helpful. And it improves student success for everyone, and it improves the institution. So there are lots of good things about it. So here's a little experiential paragraph. I'd like you to take a minute and read it if you don't mind. And so here's that same paragraph you coded. Being an ESL student in the college classroom is a little like being in a Zoom session with spotty sound and video quality. You can understand most of what's being presented, but there are times when you miss words or have to take a bit longer to decode what you read or hear. Depending upon your level of proficiency and experience, this process slows you down, is mentally exhausting. It has nothing to do with your intelligence or ability, but to others it may seem as though you're not as capable. And I think that kind of is a description of how some ESL students experience the pharmacy classroom, certainly, where they feel as though they're not fully able to represent themselves as they are. So I've had students tell me that they're actually very outgoing students and people think they're quiet. That in a classroom where you know they were speaking their native language, they would be asking many more questions, or they would be much more engaged with the faculty member. And so so that's why we had that little exercise there. So, and I think part of the problem as well is that there are a variety of levels of language proficiency. The level of language proficiency needed to get into pharmacy school and fluency is one thing, but there are some students who have been in the United States for many years. They have absolutely no trouble decoding language. They think in English. They don't have any trouble with idioms or slang or anything. And then there's some students who speak English fluently, but if someone is speaking non-standard English, or if they have a heavy Southern accent, for example, or if they use a lot of slang, they have these gaps. And no one is wearing a t-shirt saying what level of language proficiency they have. So faculty are not sure, who is getting everything they're saying and who is not. So there are some advantages for online instruction that ESL students or E2 students have. First of all, recorded lectures can be slowed down or repeated. The written transcripts make it much easier to follow the spoken lecture in Zoom, especially when the Zoom recordings come up and the transcript is over. It's not perfect, but it's very helpful to have captioning when you speak that language, but it just adds that additional layer of seeing the written word and hearing spoken word. There's less pressure to speak to other people, and there's more time to review written work in certain cases. So the question is, what kinds of things can we do in an online environment to help students and support them? And so one of the things I did, in addition to reviewing the literature and best practices, et cetera, is to have a kind of informal focus group with our own E2 students, our ESL students, just to get their advice on what they felt would be beneficial. So one thing that I think is easy to forget when you're teaching is the use of vernacular phrases and acronyms. Especially in healthcare, there are lots of acronyms for things and abbreviations and sort of shorthand terms. And that can lead to gaps in understanding for ESL students. And it, from conversations with our ESL students, it's not so much that they're being used, it's that there's not a moment to explain. There's that assumption that everybody understands what's being said. And so I think ESL students appreciate it when in those environments the person stops and sort of restates what they just said in more standard terms. Having an awareness that ESL students may be slower at answering questions on timed tests. This has been a big issue for us with short response times because they need a little bit more time to read and understand the questions. In an online environment, there's a lot of worry regarding cheating and academic integrity, and to maintain the academic integrity of the exams, faculty give students seconds to answer questions. And that can, for some students, depending upon their level of language proficiency, invalidate the test, because you're testing students on how fast they can read, not on whether they can answer the questions correctly. So this has been an ongoing conversation for us about, how do you balance academic integrity with some students' needs, legitimate needs to have a little bit more time to read a question. And we've had a couple of instances where we looked at the time taken, because we use exam software. So our assessment people actually took a look at how long each item took to answer and how long it was taking ESL students to answer each item. And again, they were struggling with the shorter response times on the questions. In the classroom, providing visual illustrations of materials in addition to written descriptions, or directing students to those resources, textbooks, etc., videos that offer that can be really helpful. For students who prefer to translate as they're taking notes, that can cause a lot of cognitive load and decrease their efficiency in learning. So best practices encourage students to take notes in English when they can. I know some of our students have Google Translate open on their computer, and if they get stuck on something, they'll quickly type the word in and get it to translate so they can move on, so they understand what's being said. But it can be a challenge for students sometimes. From what I understand, in OneNote, we've been talking to our students about note-taking strategies and using OneNote if they are going to take notes online. A lot of our students use either Notability or OneNote. And there is a translate function in OneNote. And so for students who, still feel more comfortable if they can translate their notes, there is that. I don't know how good it is. I haven't tried it out yet, but that's another possibility for students who aren't quite ready just to straight up take notes in English. And to promote the use of graphic organizers, and those are concept maps and drawings and flow charts. One of our students that I shared this strategy with when I first started at Gatton, he's graduating after this year. He's in his 4th year. But this student is very good at drawing, and so he really took the use of visuals to another level that I did not expect. But just in terms of creating drawings in his notes to reduce the text-heavy notes that students often take really made a big difference for him. And so, when he, for example, he showed me in his notes I wish I had I made a photocopy of some of them. I should have added it to the slide, but he was demonstrating the growth of something, and he used a tree as a metaphor for it. And so the tree had all the different labels on it to describe a process. So that can be very helpful for students to reduce that cognitive load that text sometimes puts on them when they're taking notes or when they're studying. Another great thing about graphic organizers is that it forces students to think more deeply and make decisions about the information that they have, which of course enhances long-term memory. So it's a good study strategy for anybody, really. Encourage all students to share their experiences with the class during discussions, creating that space and giving students enough time to decide what it is they want to say and to share that. I think for some of the students I've talked to, it's a little bit terrifying to do that. We've got, our classes usually run 70 or 80 students in a classroom, and so it takes some courage to do that in a classroom, or to be on camera on Zoom sharing something, but encouraging students to do that is really helpful. Pronouncing the student's name correctly or asking the student, how would you like your name pronounced, is very important. When you're writing on a whiteboard or notes to students or annotating something for students, it's difficult for some students to read cursive. And so printing rather than writing in cursive can be really helpful. I learned this the hard way by writing study strategy suggestions down for a student, and he finally was honest enough to say, I can't read that, what you just wrote. Could you print that or could you type it? And so if you're using whiteboard in Zoom or something like that, keeping that in mind. Checking the sound quality of your online lectures, and if you speak very quickly, making a concerted effort to slow down a bit. Allowing opportunities for students to practice speaking, writing, reading in a low stakes environment can be very helpful. And encouraging students to keep a word journal with expressions and words that are new along with their meanings. We have a few students who have been doing that. One of our students, our students always amaze me, but one of our students, I encouraged her to do this, and I found out from a faculty member later that she would wait until after class and approach the professor and say, okay, so I need to add this word to my word journal. You said this during class, and it was like a idiom or a slang term or something. And she asked for a definition for that word, and she had a really extensive word journal. So getting students to do that can be really helpful, especially with sort of regional expressions or jargon or things that are new to them, or even just a new English vocabulary word. And then with regard to the discussions with students and their suggestions, our students at Gatton gave me some suggestions for improving their experience. So understanding different pronunciations can be difficult for students developing an ear for the language. So please provide a written explanation of important concepts. Again, that sort of ability to see the written version and hear the spoken version can be really helpful. So structured notes that students can fill in, or writing the words as you talk can be really helpful. Using captions for integrity. Now we're using Panopto and Zoom. That's also very helpful, as I mentioned before. One student said that they feel left out of discussions when there's specific cultural references. I've heard this more than once, actually, from students. to television or games or toys that they didn't grow up with. And jokes are often difficult to understand. And it's been interesting to me to hear students say this. And like I said, I've heard this more than once from students, that it very much makes them feel left out when the class is laughing or talking about a cultural reference. And it's not that they mind the cultural reference being made, but just that no one explains why it's funny or references, what the TV show was about or the cultural reference. So just taking a moment to do that can be really helpful. Also, videos are really helpful. And a student suggested having a weekly or monthly meeting or a class for ESL students where they can practice conversation. We have not had that at the College of Pharmacy. I understand that there have been things like that on the main campus, which is great. And also writing in a safe environment. So just having that ability to practice. This past year, we put together a sort of Toastmasters-like monthly meeting called Gatton Speaks for all of our students to practice public speaking in different contexts. I believe the last one we had was reception talk to learn how to make conversation at a conference reception and how to sort of mingle and what topics are safe to kind of start a conversation and things like that. And we had a really good response from students. They really enjoyed that. And our ESL students in particular really liked that opportunity to practice conversation and, to learn more about what is typically, reception talk. And one of our professors actually showed up with sparkling grape juice and little cups and like cheese squares and stuff like that so that we could practice balancing a plate and a cup and talking to somebody at the same time. Some other suggestions from our students at Gatton: give us more time to react to questions on Zoom and in class, especially if the question is long and written on a slide. It would help to have the questions to read in advance so we're prepared. So that kind of, the slide is up there, it's got the question on it. If it takes longer for a student to decode the question and process what the answer is, they miss out on the opportunity to answer it in class because it's taking them a little bit longer. We like to ask questions privately rather than in front of the class. Zoom private chat feature is great for this, and the faculty are always very nice about meeting individually. Small groups are better than large ones. It's easier to communicate and share my ideas when there are 2 or 3 people rather than 5 or 6. Just that the momentum of the conversation when there are that many people makes it really difficult to kind of jump in and share an idea. And then, as I mentioned before, one of the students was talking about just keeping Google Translate open on their computer all the time so they could translate words back and forth. So students also expressed a lot of gratitude toward faculty and staff for that kind of individual attention and maybe not always being completely aware of what the problem is, but just being willing to hear the student is very meaningful. Some students describe not always being honest about feeling overwhelmed for fear they would be seen as inadequate. That happens a lot, I think, for our students, that they're not 100% sure of the answer, or if they think everybody else knows and doesn't have to ask the question, they're not going to ask. So having that ability, I think that's kind of an advantage of Zoom, that it's easier to write the question in the chat than it is to say it in front of the whole class. And then nearly all of the students wanted more opportunities to meet with other students and to speak with students whose first language is English, and to just get better at communication just through conversation, not necessarily, very targeted instruction or anything, but just to have that opportunity to practice. So I'd just like to take a minute and in the chat, if I could, ask you to write a little bit about your experiences with students whose first and best language is not English, and kind of what stands out for you with regard to your interaction with these students and your experiences. And I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a minute. So cultural conflicts and barriers in a home environment, especially those living in multi-generational households or communal living environments. We also use the term thank you, ELL, English language learner. Mind maps. Raven has another meeting to attend, needs to leave early. Thank you for coming. So it looks like I think kind of going hand in hand with the language barriers are cultural issues that come up as well. I don't think you can necessarily separate language and culture. I'm seeing challenges with writing and judgments from others because of this in terms of intellect. Yeah, I think that's a really big challenge when for students, especially if they're interacting with students who don't have a lot of experience with people whose first and best language isn't English. ESL students report not understanding U.S. history, so cultural ideas are often hard to understand. Yeah, and I think there's so much to both U.S. history and popular culture that it's hard to know all of it. What percentage of students are African American? Are there cultural differences comparable to ESL? So in terms of Edward, if you're asking about the percentage of African American students in the College of Pharmacy, I don't have that number with me today. And are the cultural differences comparable to ESL? To be honest with you, I only have had sort of anecdotal conversations with our students of color, so I wouldn't speak for them in that regard. So I really don't know the answer to that question. But I'm sure there are cultural differences, cultural issues, and as I'm learning from some of our ESL students as well, is there are cross-cultural differences even among, for example, I was talking to one of our students who moved to the United States from Vietnam in his late teens, and he was talking about the cultural differences between students who were born in Vietnam and moved to the United States and Vietnamese American students, and that he felt that sometimes, and this was his experience, but he felt that sometimes people made the assumption that those two groups of students would automatically kind of mesh with each other and talk to each other and be friends, and he said that there actually was sometimes some tension there. So even within cultures, it's very nuanced and complex, and so it's difficult to make assumptions about about different groups, and I'm still in the process of learning. So Rebecca says, I've had some mixed experience. Some ESL students are more comfortable than others about speaking in class. Most all are great about emailing me or talking with me before or after class. That's been my experience too, Rebecca, that really depends on the student. We have some extremely outgoing, extremely gregarious students who one student who comes to mind who worked for me as a tutor, he may not have always had exactly the right word, but he didn't care. He would just go for it, and no sort of reservations about reaching out to people and talking, and then some students are very reserved and reticent to say anything for fear that they're going to make a mistake or not say something correctly. Teresa says, we've been offering a weekly English table for several years. I've heard about that, actually, and it's not well attended. Similarly, in CBAT, where there are many international students, we offered specialized ESL consulting in the writing lab for a couple of years, and virtually nobody came. Oh, wow. Sort of stuck on the problem of how to get them to take advantage of the services.
Yeah, I'm not in business and technology, but I approached them when I found out they had a lot of international students and said that my TESOL interns could staff something like that. So we tried it for a couple of years. I don't think we had 2 appointments over 2 years.
Really? That's very interesting, because in just a minute I'm going to talk about some programming that we're putting in place for this coming year. So that's very interesting. Sharon says, I do not teach, but I have classes with students from other countries, and I generally do not share interact in class unless directly asked to do so. Yeah, I think it can be kind of challenging to take that risk and speak out in class. In the College of Pharmacy, it's a kind of a cultural thing that doesn't happen a lot for any student in the classroom. I don't know if it's the large class size or the intense amount of content, but in lecture classes that I've observed when we were on the ground and I would go to classrooms and observe the class, that really struck me that very few students speak out in class, offer suggestions, ask questions, those kinds of things. And so in my individual meetings with students, I asked them why that was, because, in education classes, in the classes I was in, if you have a question, you're asking it, right? You don't care if you interrupt everybody, you're just going to ask the question. And so it's a very different environment. And so the students told me that in some cases it was kind of the sort of social norm that you don't ask questions and it slows down the lecture and they need to get through that lecture, and so don't slow the professor down and ask him something or ask her something, which I just kind of blew me away. I didn't realize that was the expectation. And then Carla says, what is the predominant first language for your ESL students? It's all over the map, literally all over the globe. So we have a fair number of students who are from various countries in Africa. We have Asian students. We have a number of students from Puerto Rico whose first language is not English. They speak Spanish. So really there's no one language that I can point to that really stands out as being the predominant language. We have a number of students from countries like India and some countries in Africa where English is taught in K-12 for many years. So they're very fluent in English, but it's a different type of English. It's often British English. Personality, yeah, it does play a part, but it's been interesting to me in talking to some ESL students that at an institution I worked at before I came to ETSU, I'm certified to do Myers-Briggs. And so for students who wanted to take the Myers-Briggs, I would give it to them and discuss their results with them. And it would be interesting to me sometimes that students that I knew that I thought were had quite a preference for introversion were actually extroverts. And it was the language issue that made them more introverted. Sharon says, do you think that pride may be an issue if someone were to get assistance? Yes, definitely. both with our ESL students and other students, convincing them that coming to see me is not an expression of weakness or that you can't cut it. Is still an ongoing challenge. It's gotten better, or tutoring for that matter, or supplemental instruction. To that asking for help, is self-advocacy and not a weakness. That's been an ongoing challenge, as I'm sure it is for y'all too. So Jessica says, growing up in Miami, Florida, and attending public schools, the majority of students at my school were ELL. Many assumed these students had lower learning abilities due to not speaking English fluently, but they had to not just complete assignments, but also translate the instructions every time. The same goes for college students who are ELL. I've noticed that negative stereotypes sometimes affiliated with ELLs lead to feelings of learned helplessness. Yeah. Additionally, there was a palpable divide between those students who were ELL and those who spoke English fluently. It affected their comfort level, which extracurricular activities they could engage in too. That resonates with me in terms of the students that I've talked with. Jessica, I think that's very much the case, that it can be dispiriting and angering sometimes when students feel like they're being treated. This actually came up in, our students are assigned to these learning groups that they stay with. It's a cohort they stay with throughout the time they're in pharmacy school. And I was called in to help kind of do some conflict resolution with a group. And it was really at the heart of the problem. And the professor wound up changing the learning group around a little bit to change that dynamic. But the dynamic very much revolved around a student whose first language was not English, and a certain level of impatience from the student's colleagues in that learning group, that they did not leave enough time and space for that student who was very, very capable and bright to share. And then also that sort of kind of nonverbal things people do to each other, eye rolling and things like that within the group. And it was not a good situation. And so they wound up retooling that group quite a bit to change that dynamic. But it was not a good situation. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences here. I'm going to screen share for another moment just to talk a little bit about the programming we have planned at the College of Pharmacy, and maybe to get your take on some of that. So we were lucky enough to get a grant funded through the Tennessee Board of Regents this year. So we're really excited about that. And we got a lot of help from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and we appreciated that a lot too. A lot of support from y'all. Thank you very much. And so it's called the Peer E2 project, and it stands for Promoting Engagement, Excellence, and Retention for E2 students. And so it focuses on 6 main areas: specialized tutoring. So we're going to recruit and train students to tutor with the needs of ESL students in mind, some of them being ESL students themselves. A weekly language lab, which is something, and a lot of this was inspired by our ESL students and the things they told me they wished we had. So I owe a debt of gratitude to those students for sure. And weekly language lab, peer mentoring, a monthly culture and language exchange, which while we're online is going to be kind of interesting. And focused recruiting of linguistically diverse students. So we already do some of that. There are areas of the United States where we've drawn quite a number of students, and they're often sort of cultural enclaves, and many of those students are their first language is not English, and so we're going to continue that, and then also funding for participants to attend the Tennessee Society of Student Pharmacists meeting in February. So we're really hoping that's not going to be a Zoom meeting, because we would like for them to have the opportunity to travel there. So I'm going to stop screen sharing again. So I'd like to, if I could get your feedback about that. So Teresa, what you said concerned me a little bit about participation. We did request funding for some financial incentives in there, for participation and so forth for students, stipends and things like that, with the rationale that trying to generate participation so that we can keep this going next year. So our hope is that the students who participate, the P1s, first years, who participate this year will be part of the leadership of the group next year, and we're hoping that eventually a student organization forms that is for linguistically diverse and culturally diverse students, so they can come together. And so we're hoping that some of these activities, we have really vibrant student life at the College of Pharmacy. We have a lot of great student organizations, so we're hoping that we'll get some momentum going through that as well. So one of the things that you mentioned that I was that kind of put me on alert was that participation, getting students to come to these events, especially pharmacy students who have very, very full schedules and really rigorous classes that they're studying for, and convincing them of doing anything extra can be a challenge. But I'm hoping, because they made that request for Conversation Lab, to have that opportunity to talk to each other, and I'm hoping that pharmacy students, it's been my experience, I hope I'm not just making a overgeneralization here, but it seems as though they tend to participate more if it's structured. So if it's something specific, I learned that with the kind of public speaking opportunities, if it was too casual, the pharmacy students don't do casual too much. They do casual, but not at school. So we made it very structured. We had specific activities like, for around various topics, giving a speech on various topics that were relevant to what they were going to have to do in pharmacy school, practicing interviewing skills, practicing reception talk, as I mentioned before. And that, if there was a direct application to something they knew they were going to do, and to improve those skills, are much more likely to participate. So I'm hoping that the structure will bring more students in, and those opportunities, along with the little, the small stipend that we have for them as well. So what other questions and comments do you have about students? Are there things that I didn't address during the presentation? So Sharon has shared, have you considered a pen Zoom pal where they can practice skills in both writing and speaking with a one-on-one experience? That's a great idea. So say a little bit more about that, because that sounds really intriguing. Do you mind, Sharon?
Well, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Well, I was thinking, in a class, I'm taking Japanese presently, and I know that I'm speaking with other English speakers, so we know, and our instructors have been very relaxed and saying, we all make mistakes, and that's a normal thing. But even practicing speaking with 15 other people, there's a little stress involved with it. But I was thinking, establishing a relationship with someone who speaks English with someone who does not speak English as their normal everyday language. They may not even use it in their homes. Like if you had a married couple that came here from a different country, they may speak their native language at home, but in your classes, they're speaking English. Mm-hmm. If they had someone that they trusted that, that if they made errors that they wouldn't feel humiliated, it would be a supportive environment where they know it's okay to make mistakes and that that's normal and that they had a supportive environment. Maybe in that situation, they would be more willing to, I guess, increase their terminology and try new words and, forming sentences that would not be, that would be out of the norm for them, but they could, they could try it out. And they could also write, whether it's emails or even writing, writing by hand, because you learn a lot, probably more because you've got spell check and stuff like that on the computer. Writing by hand, not necessarily writing like cursive, but, printing a letter to someone or a card or something like that, interacting back and forth with one another, then, they could learn sentence structure, at the same time, but you've got that physical touch that helps you remember things more.
I really like that idea. I think that's a great idea. I'm totally stealing that. I think that that's really important for a lot of students. There have been a few students that I've worked with individually. I do I call it academic consultation. It's academic coaching with our students. And there have been a couple of students that felt comfortable enough. Every once in a while they'll shoot me an email and say, I'm emailing my preceptor, or I'm applying for a job and this is an email I'm sending. Would you read over this and make sure that it sounds appropriate, that I'm using the right language? And so I do that occasionally for our students, but I can't do it for every one of our students. And I think having a pen Zoom pal would be a great way for them to have a resource to say, could you look at this and does this sound right? Or I'm practicing this, or could I run this past you? I think that would be great. And to maybe have that be a part of the language labs that, or the mentoring, as Marissa said.
With the Zoom meetings, they could meet, even if they just met someone once every 2 weeks or once a month. Yeah. It could be a time that they're scheduled. They could even, virtually watch movies together or share something like what is their favorite music together. It could be topical things where it could be something that they could share something that they liked of their culture with the other person. So it's a win-win situation, because you'll learn about their culture and they get to learn about yours, and more of a friendly type as opposed to an academic type setting. Even though you've got that level, they're developing a trust relationship.
I think that's a great idea. And that was really kind of the thought behind the culture and language exchange. Of course, when we put it together, we were envisioning them being together, in a room and maybe sharing food and things like that as well. But just and also to travel a bit, but just to give students an opportunity because that's something else that students have talked to me about, that they're here in this beautiful area that is steeped in Appalachian culture. They want to know more about Appalachian culture, and they want to talk to people who know more about it and get to know those people and share their own culture. And so that was really kind of the impetus behind the culture and language exchange, to give students an opportunity to share those things about themselves with each other that they might not normally do. And doing something outside of healthcare and pharmacy, but those things informing each other. That's a great idea. Thank you very much. Other thoughts? We have about 5 minutes left. Is that right? So if you have any other thoughts or questions, I wanted to let you know as well that with the grant, we plan on hiring a graduate student. It's not an assistantship. It's just a temporary position to help facilitate those culture and language exchanges and the language lab. So if you know of a graduate student, perhaps in TESOL, or who has an interest in diversity in language, we're going to be posting that position after the 1st of September when we get the grant funds. So just to give you a heads up about that too, if you know of someone, to ask them to check out the job board, because that'll be up there at that point. And right now it'll be online, because we're planning on being online until the end of the fall semester. So
does that need to be a current graduate student? Because there are several graduates of the TESOL program that are still around here. They're adjuncts and what have you. They're real good.
I have to look again at how we describe the position.
Okay.
So it'll be in that position description after the 1st of September.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if there, and yes, Teresa, I'd be happy to give you updates on how it goes for sure. So thank you very much for your time and your attention this afternoon. And if you want to continue the conversation, I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Being named Michelle Williams, it kind of complicates things a little bit. I told the students, our new pharmacy students, that you can remember my email address if you think of it as Williams shaking my head, like in a text message. So if you'd like to shoot me an email, I'd love to hear from you. And thanks again for your time and your questions and your ideas. It was terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope y'all have a good afternoon.
Okay.
You too.